Welcome to the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Hannah O'Brien, both a veteran spouse and the program manager for the Veteran Spouse Network. On each episode of our show, I will host different guests to learn more about the stories, unmet needs, and resources available to our military and veteran families. We're the show that's making space for your stories, so that here you know you're never alone. Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah O'Brien, and I am your host of the Veteran Spouse Network podcast. And on this episode, our inaugural episode, I really just wanted to introduce myself and share my story as a veteran spouse and kind of let you know what we can expect as we kind of go on this journey together of talking about military and veteran families and their support needs, their strengths, their challenges, their resiliency, their stories, right? This is really what this podcast is all about. So I hope you're excited to join us and in this case, learn a little bit about me. Quick tidbits. I am the spouse of a Marine Corps veteran. I am a new mother of a soon-to-be 6-month-old baby. I am a social worker, and I am the program manager of the Veteran Spouse Network. The Veteran Spouse Network, if you haven't heard of us, we are an organization based out of the University of Texas at Austin, within the Institute for Military and Veteran Family Wellness. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how my role fits into my own journey here in a bit. A little bit about my background. I live here in Austin, Texas, and I actually grew up in Austin, Texas, on what they call a unicorn. Very rare for us to, for people who were born here to still live here. I'm very close with my family, and in growing up, I really had no tie to the military or veteran community in any way. My grandfather on my dad's side did serve. However, he died when I was pretty young, and I didn't really know much about his service. And as far as I know, he didn't share much about his service. So other than knowing that he had served, that was really my only tie. And I had no understanding of the military or veteran community other than what is portrayed in the news or in movies. And for those of you listening who are a part of this community, you know how accurate that can be. All that to say, though, I really had no connection. I had no understanding until I started essentially dating somebody. I started dating a guy who was a veteran, and like even that, guys, I didn't even know veterans. I didn't have friends who were veterans. I really had no connection. And so when I started dating this guy, he was an Army vet. A lot of his friends were veterans. They were members of the veteran organization on campus. And so in the almost 2 years that we dated, I spent a lot of time with veterans. And so I started oh, wow, these guys and gals are kind of a different breed, learning and really enjoying, the people I was meeting and kind of getting to learn a little bit of the military and veteran culture. But even in that time, I would say it was pretty light. Or surface level, right? I didn't feel like I was getting fully let in, and I wasn't having those kinds of conversations to really learn more than, touching on the surface. Then I met my husband. So I met my husband when I was pretty newly going to grad school at UT, getting my master's in social work. And he was just different in a lot of ways. My feelings for him were different. People who have heard me kind of tell our stories is even like the day I met him, like a couple hours into meeting him, I didn't know that he was necessarily like my soulmate. I'm going to end up with this person, but I knew this was a forever person. I knew this person was going to be in my life forever. I was supposed to have them in my life forever. Um, it didn't take long for us to figure out that that meant coupled or romantic, whatever you want to say about that. So my relationship to him was different, but also his relationship with the military was different than the guy I had been dating previously, or even, the other veterans I had been interacting with, or at least, my understanding, I'll say that. He was a Marine, and I hadn't interacted with many Marines at that point, and that Marine culture I should say, very much a part of his identity. And so I got to understand a lot about that. And then also he is a veteran with PTSD, and he told me that the day I met him. And that was part of the reason I knew he was a forever person, was even the day we met, we talked about a lot, and he was very open with me and about how, previous relationships had gone and been impacted by his PTSD. And so while I knew PTSD is a thing that exists, and I knew it, I had an understanding of that, from my social work education, and I knew it was a thing that exists in the military and veteran community. I had never known anybody that had PTSD to my knowledge, right? And who was openly talking about it. And so here I was with this person that I was like, this is a forever person in my life. They have this strong identity with the military and Marine and veteran culture, and they have PTSD, and they're openly talking to me about it. And so we started our relationship pretty immediately after meeting. And as I just got to know more about kind of that piece of him, this military veteran piece of him, I got curious about the military and veteran populations. I got curious personally, and I got curious professionally. So personally, I just kind of started asking Cody questions about his service. And questions that, like, even though in the 2 years previous to this, I'd been dating a veteran, I was, becoming friends with a lot of veterans, these just weren't questions I asked for whatever reason at the time with those people. So I was starting to ask questions I'd never asked before, just to understand more. And that was a really interesting experience, because he was real taken aback by that, in the sense that, he was like, whoa, like no one's really asked me these types of questions. Like no one's asked me about my service. No one seems to really care about this part of my life. And even in talking to him just the other day, prepping for this session, he said, still nobody today, nobody asks me about this time in my life, even though it's such a huge part of his identity. And I could go on a whole other conversation and rant about that, but that's sad, right? So here I was getting curious and being more outgoing and wanting to learn and listen and understand. And, that made an impact on him, for sure. And then on the professional front, I originally had been really interested in working with incarcerated and homeless populations. And I kind of started pivoting my interest to the military and veteran population, because I remember just being like, dang, this is such a huge part of our community. Like, even though it's a small percentage of those who serve, we're hearing about this all the time. And like, to think, me, I'm, 33 years old. So we've been at war for most of my life. And, this community is in the news, it's in the media. And the truth of the matter is, I know nothing about them. I know nothing about it. And I felt, just as a individual who is being served by these people, and as a professional in the helping, soon to be a professional in the helping profession, I was like, that's not okay. And so I really turned my interest to learning more. Ended up doing my capstone project, on this population. And And it just became more curious. And I wanted to learn everything I could, personally and professionally. Cody and I, we hit the ground running in our relationship, and it was just incredible. I'd never felt this way. It felt that he felt exactly the same way. We just had the most amazing time together. And, I was like, oh, this is it. This is what people look for, wait for their whole entire lives. And about 3 months into our relationship, we hit a big speed bump. And it was one-sided. I had no idea what was happening or why, but all of a sudden he was pulling away hard and fast with almost no communication. And so I felt like we really went from 60 to 0, and it was painful and confusing. And that's all I can say, right? I was so confused. And so I was trying to understand. I was reaching out. He was putting a ton of distance between us. And I just didn't get it. And we've talked a lot, obviously. We've been together for a long time now, married, have a child. So we've talked about this, and obviously we worked through this stuff. We're here, we're happy, successful couple. But I didn't know at all what was going on at the time. I just know I was hurt. And it took me a long time, or it took him, I guess I should say, a long time to even open up to me, to have the awareness that I'm about to talk to you guys about. But what ended up happening was, when this first bump happened, it was November. And that was an anniversary for him. And for those of you who are members of this population, I don't have to explain what that means. But for anyone listening who's not, it was an anniversary of a time in service where he had been injured. And that injury ultimately led to him, parting with the Marine Corps, which was not his plan. And it also resulted in the death of a lot of people in his unit. And he says these types of anniversaries they refer to as their own personal D-days. So hopefully that can give some perspective for those who may not understand. And what you can understand, if you haven't served or you don't love someone who has served, is we all can have anniversaries, right? We lose a loved one, something bad happens to us. Those anniversaries are difficult. And so November was one for him, and he didn't handle it well. And he, has since kind of told me his approach was just kind of telling himself, I'm doing fine. Like, I'm okay. Ignoring, right? Avoidance, and lots of alcohol and to cope. And because he was leaning into avoidance, I hadn't, he wouldn't talk to me. I didn't know what was going on. Like, let's tell it like it is. Like, he basically ghosted me. I didn't know it was an anniversary. I just saw him pulling away and struggling and putting distance between us, and not communicating with me about what was happening. So he wouldn't talk to me about what was going on, but he also wouldn't fully cut me loose. And that made it really difficult, because I really wanted to understand, and I really wanted to figure out a way to work through it. But at the same time, it didn't mean this wasn't hurtful. And this ended up becoming a cycle for us, a 3-month cycle, where essentially he would, kind of the way I classify it now is he would throw a bomb into our relationship. So he would do something hurtful, kind of trying to force me to walk away from the relationship. And again, the way he's kind of talked to me about it since we've moved through it is he didn't want to be the one to end it. So he didn't want to be to blame. And so he would do something that would force me to be the one to end it. And then it was easier for him to kind of say, oh, well, you know, she couldn't stick it out. And for him, what was going on was trauma avoidance. Whether it was that the first time where it was avoidance of that anniversary and coping with that, or, you know, he had also had a lot of relationship trauma, and he was married when he was in service, and it did not, you know, end well. And so there was a lot of baggage there and trauma there. And so when those feelings would start to come up for him, he would start running from them. And that equaled running from anything. And then simultaneously, he didn't want to become attached to anything. And I very much fell into that category. And so these bombs he would throw into our relationship were his way to detach, but to essentially force me to be the one to detach. And so we'd detach, we'd end things in one way or another, but neither of us really wanted to. And as a result, neither of us could fully walk away. So we'd either kind of like fake break up, like it would just be like, I guess we're not together anymore, or we would we would formally break up. But we couldn't stay out of each other's lives, and we just couldn't stay away from each other. And, you know, at least from my perspective, I never wanted to walk away. I always wanted to stay. I always wanted to fight. I always wanted to figure out what was going on, but he just kept pushing me away, and it wore on me. You know, a person can only take so much, or, I felt crazy sometimes. I felt crazy sometimes. But some part of me, like, it's hard to describe. Some part of me, whether it's like in my soul or what have you, really like felt like I knew that something more was at play. Something bigger was at play than just, he's a bad guy, he's hurting you, he doesn't want to be with you. I really believed, I don't think this is about me. I think this is something else that's going on, but he wouldn't give me an inch to work with that. So it didn't, knowing that didn't really make it easier. In fact, it oftentimes made it harder, because it made me want to push through and keep trying. But then basically I was the only one trying. Or it made it very easy to go back at a weak moment. And it was just really hard. I never wanted to walk away, but I was getting forced into it. And, he's told me that from his perspective, after kind of throwing the bomb and being like, I got to detach from this, he'd have that kind of sobering moment, figuratively and probably sometimes literally, where he'd kind of have that reality check with himself, realizing, you know what, I'm not okay. Like, I'm pretending I'm okay, but I'm not okay. And in those moments, he would realize, or, it would become clear for him, like, I have really strong feelings for this woman. And, she's treated me in a way that no one ever has. She's given me empathy and understanding that no one had given him. He said, I didn't write him off. I didn't blow him off. I didn't dismiss him in ways that he had felt dismissed in past relationships, past, parts of his life. And even, he said, even he's felt dismissed from the Marine Corps in that way, being medically separated when he wanted to be career. And then it's, okay, bye, good riddance, and we don't need you anymore. We don't want you anymore. And so he had this trauma around being dismissed. And in those sobering moments, he would realize, like, she's not doing that. Like, I keep thinking she's going to do it because I think everyone's going to do it, and she's not doing it. And that's kind of what would drive him back. And this, for a couple of years, was our 3 to 4 month cycle. We would date, and about 3 months, he'd throw a bomb. I'd try to connect, fight through it, figure out what's going on. We'd ultimately part, but we couldn't part. We'd bind ourselves back together, and then 3 months later, it would happen again. And anyone listening, you can imagine how that wears on you. And, he says, and it's clear, like, he wasn't addressing the root of his issues. So this just kept happening, right? And I couldn't fix them. No one can fix anyone, and Lord knows I wanted to, but I can't. A human can't do that. And he wasn't even really ready to admit that there was anything that needed fixing. And so this just kept happening. And it was a really challenging, couple years in our relationship, the beginning of our relationship. And it was really confusing and painful. And you can imagine, because some of you may be sitting there saying, girl, me too. I get it. And some of you may be sitting there and saying, oh my God, what a sad sap. Why'd you put up with that for so long? And guess what? If you are thinking that, you're not alone. In fact, it's how a lot of people in my life, felt. They didn't like him. They saw, you're hurting someone I love. You're not putting in the work that she's putting in. You're not giving the love and the care and the respect that she's putting in, that she's giving to you, that she deserves. We don't like you. We don't want you here. We don't want her going through this anymore. And of course, I understand that. But at the end of the day, I wanted to be there. I wanted to fight. I wanted to figure it out and work through it, because I knew this was my forever person, even on the days that it didn't make sense, right? But for whatever reason, and I definitely don't blame any of them for this, but for whatever reason, my friends weren't willing to be as understanding as I was. And I really do get it, Like, honestly, if the tables were turned, I probably have had some of those moments of like, oh my gosh, girl, cut him loose. And so I got a lot of this, like, you deserve better. This guy is hurting you. Why do you put up with this? He doesn't care about you like the way you want him to or think he does. And sometimes that would be directly said to me, and sometimes it was just clear from the conversations or the reactions I would get when I was trying to talk to a friend or a family member about what was going on and where I was struggling. And, I didn't feel supported. I felt isolated because I didn't feel like they were trying to understand how I felt about it. They didn't get or want to see or care to see the nuance that I was feeling and seeing about this. And so as a result, honestly, I felt like I was constantly coming to his defense and trying to explain that nuance, explain why I was feeling and doing what I was doing. And it was emotionally exhausting. So instead of getting support, I was like defending my feelings. And as a result, I wasn't getting support. And so, and not only was I not getting support, but those interactions were painful for me. And so I stopped having them. I stopped talking to people about it. Or I chose very carefully what I said to people because I didn't want the judgment. I didn't want the questions. I didn't want to have to explain myself. And you can imagine how isolating that felt, feeling like, and I have a lot of people in my life that I am very close to. And I felt like I couldn't talk to any of them anymore. And yet, rewind to all the stuff that was happening in our relationship that was really painful and difficult. So I'm going through stress. I want support and I'm not getting it. So I isolated in my pain. And it was really hard. let's leave it at that for now. It was really hard. So how did we kind of break this cycle? Well, some work on his part and some support on my part. So we broke the cycle. And, I've talked a lot about kind of what was going on for him. And then of course I know what was going on for me. When he finally kind of began opening up to me more, and also kind of giving into his feelings for me, being able to say, yeah, I love you. I'm in love with you. Like validating that he did feel how I thought he did, how I knew he did, but questioned because his actions showed otherwise, right? And then he did begin opening up to me more about his service, about trauma, about family life, past relationships, stress, pain, things that he was going through. We started kind of peeling away at some of that. But really, what happened is after, I don't know, third, fourth time that we went through that cycle, the last time that we ended up breaking up, we had really tried, in that 3-4 month of dating, we really tried. We went to therapy. We really fully invested in one another. And something that happened that time that I realized from my side was I had not healed from the trauma of our relationship. And I was not able to be with him as a result. I wanted to, but I couldn't be. And simultaneously, something he realized was he had not worked on himself. So we both kind of simultaneously realized, like, we both have pain. We both have stuff that we have not worked through that we need to work through on our own. And we need to go and we need to do that. And so we parted, knowing that was why we were parting. And simultaneously, we also decided not to try and cut each other out because we knew we couldn't do that. Like, honestly, we knew we couldn't, we had to be in each other's life in some way. And so we decided to stay in each other's lives, to be friends, and to work on ourselves. And that just took so much pressure off. And then we did that, we did put the work in as individuals to work on ourselves. And then, as things happen, sky opens up and throws you a bone or a sign or what have you every once in a while. He tore a muscle in his calf and, had to be on crutches. He ended up having a severe blood clot, so he had a very serious recovery journey from this injury. And at the time we were friends, so we were in each other's lives. And another thing Cody really struggled with was not wanting to be dependent, like not wanting to be attached, but also not wanting to be dependent on another person, not wanting to need anything from anyone. And part of that was people all my life have let me down, I have not followed through. And then the other part of that was Marine Corps military culture of self-sufficiency as strength and asking for help as weakness. And so that was like ingrained in him. And I hope some of you are shaking your heads like, oh my God, girl, how do we get that out of here? It was ingrained in him. And tearing his calf, he hit this point where he was, he was living alone. He was living alone, working, had 2 dogs, and he had this very serious injury. And he has told me, he kind of had this light bulb moment or this awareness where he was like, I need help. Like, I need help. And he reached out to me for it. And even just the act of reaching out to me for it, being like, she's the person I'm going to trust to help me, he said was huge for him. And so like we weren't even dating, but I was helping him, running errands, helping take care of the dogs. I went to doctor's appointments with him. Because I cared about him, I cared about him, and we weren't trying to force it. And this was something I genuinely wanted to do. And to open up to me in that way, and then to see me follow through, right? And be that person he could depend on. He was like, that changed it for me. He was like, that was that realization of, I kept trying to tell myself that this girl's different, I can trust her. She's not going to let me down. She sees me in a way no one has. But he wasn't in a place to hear that or believe that. And this kind of forced him into that place. And then we did a lot of work. Maybe that's a conversation for another podcast. We did a lot of work. But something that was simultaneously going on was I was finding my own community where I could get support. When we were in a really dark place, I knew I needed, and I felt like I no one else was getting it. I couldn't talk to the people I normally get from support from. I was like, well, I had to find something else. And, I was in therapy, but I needed more than that. I needed people who were living this life, who were loving a veteran, who were loving someone with PTSD. And so I was getting my master's in social work at the time. So I asked several professors, I said, okay, like, where do veteran family members or spouses or partners, where do they go? Like, where are there peer support groups for them? I need to talk to other people who get this. And everyone asked that I really don't think that exists. It doesn't exist. And someone finally suggested Al-Anon. And that was just a really low moment for me, like a sad for me, but also just sad for the community moment. And that I'm like, this is really stupid that this doesn't exist. And seriously, you're suggesting Al-Anon? Like, alcoholism and veterans and PTSD are not the same thing. And I get it. They were trying to support me and offer something. But I was like, this is a problem. And so fast forward to the end of my graduate program, a month or so before graduation, we start the job hunt. And, I'm kind of applying all over. I'm still applying for places in the incarceration and homelessness, fields. But I also saw a couple positions open right at the university that I was graduating from that were supporting programs for veteran spouses and veteran couples. And so I applied to those. And ultimately ended up getting the job. Go me. I started working for my boss, Dr. Lisa Bora, a week before I graduated in May 2017. And since then, I mean, part of that role at the time was coordinating the Veteran Spouse Network. And I've been there ever since and gotten to grow and develop peer support group programming for military and veteran spouses, partners, and family members. And that has been so huge for me. I don't say this lightly. I truly don't know if my husband and I would be where we are in a happy marriage with a baby daughter if it weren't for my job. And That's why when this podcast came up, I wanted to jump at this because this job has done this. I say this job, but along with this job, it's really this community. This community has done so much for me and my family. And to be able every day to get to pour into that and to help create supportive communities for veteran spouses like me who might be struggling, who might be thinking they're crazy, who might be feeling isolated. To tell them, you're not crazy, you're not alone. There are others living this life, struggling with the same thing, or others who have worked through it and figured out what works for them, for their relationship, for their family, that you can learn from. To be able to get to do that every day, to me, is such a gift. And I don't know what you guys are hearing. I'm getting emotional on the other side of this, because it's personal for me. And what we do at the Veteran Spouse Network is personal for me, and it's personal for my team. Many of us are members of this community ourselves. And by getting to grow our programming, our peer support and educational programming for these military and veteran families, we fill our cup, and we create a community of support, not just for others, but for ourselves. My staff, our leaders that we train and support as they lead these groups. That's my peer support. That's my community. Talking to these spouses, these participants who engage in our group, that fills my cup as much as I hope that it fills theirs. And I'm just so grateful. And so getting to jump on this podcast, this opportunity to share the amazing stories, which include the challenges as well as the strengths, the resilience, the resourcefulness of our military and veteran spouses, partners, and family members. I had to jump on this. I was so excited. I've been so excited. We've been working on this for months. And the truth of the matter is, people aren't talking about us enough. They're not talking about us enough. They don't see the family. The truth is, they don't see the veteran or the service member in the way that they deserve to be seen either, but they really don't see the family. And I hope that you join us for future sessions of this podcast, for future episodes, because we're going to be talking about all sorts of different topics that affect our military and veteran families. And I'll be bringing different guests on to share their stories. I really want this to be a space where people can learn about military and veteran family life, as well as get that support and that community. And if one person in this who's listening out there today feels less alone by hearing my story, or next week by hearing somebody else's story, then we will have achieved exactly what I'm hoping. That's what this space is for, so that everyone out there can understand you are not alone, you have a tribe, and you can and should get the support that you deserve. Thanks again for joining us on the Veteran Spouse Network podcast, brought to you in collaboration with Coming Home Well. We thank you for listening today and hope today's session left you feeling a little more connected or gave you some insight into the experiences of our military and veteran families. Don't forget to check us out at veteranspousenetwork.org to learn more about how our military and veteran families can receive the support they deserve.